some new faces to the Withum East Suites interviews this episode. I am Breea Boylan, tax supervisor at Withum on the state and local tax floor. I specialize in sales and use tax with technology and emerging growth companies. Courtney Easterday is also here, and I'll let her introduce herself, and then we can introduce our guests. So super thrilled to be having this conversation.
Thank you, Breea, for the introduction. I'm Courtney Easterday. I'm a senior tax manager here with Withum. I co-lead the sales tax here at the firm, and I am excited to have Steve Chapman here for a discussion about sales tax in the e-commerce space.
Yeah, we're here with Steve Chapman, VP of Accounting at BirdBuddy. Steve has a plethora of experience in finance and accounting role with 7 years in the e-commerce space. BirdBuddy is an AI-powered bird feeder which captures photos and videos of local birds to receive instant alerts on your phone. We're here to talk about sales tax and how the ever-evolving laws, starting with Wayfair, affected e-commerce businesses. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to this conversation. So Steve, with the evolving economic nexus rules, how do you ensure compliance across multiple states for sales tax?
First off, thanks for having me, Breea and Courtney. Pleasure to be here. Basically, I try to use the experts where I can, and I know I'm a CPA registered here in New York, but taxes are not my thing, especially sales tax. So I definitely want to go to the experts where needed, and that's where I've enjoyed working with both of you over the last number of years and last couple of companies I've worked for to help ensure compliance and deal with various nexus issues as companies I've worked for, especially BirdBuddy, has expanded sales to the whole country and now starting to expand across the world.
So has there been any strategies that you have implemented throughout your experience for sales and use tax and Nexus specifically?
I think the main strategy is to just keep an eye on where our sales are occurring on a monthly basis and to track, usually using third-party software where we're able to get notifications that we're approaching Nexus and then determine the next steps in terms of registering for sales tax at that particular state or other location. Sometimes for the various startups I work for, where previous finance teams have registered ahead of time, way before Nexus has even been across, so we kind of have to catch up and adjust our kind of reporting and determine whether we actually still should be registered or if we need to actually go ahead and deregister from those various locations because we don't want to have to continue to fill out $0 returns and spend that time and money on sales tax reporting where it's not required at the time.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point because we've actually been seeing a lot of states pull back on some of those regulations, right? So Alaska was one of the states this year that released guidance about, if you didn't need to actually be reporting in some of the localities and how you can pull your registration out. There are other states where actually they no longer will let you kind of volunteer to even register if you haven't crossed over some of those economic nexus thresholds. So you're 100% correct. And the space has been changing pretty significantly over the last couple of years. So, with Wayfair and post Wayfair, everybody panicked, and now it kind of feels like everybody's kind of getting on board with a little bit more of a generalization on how to deal with it across a lot of these states.
Right.
Yeah. You also brought up a good point with just staying on top of it, right? We see for e-commerce horror stories of companies all of a sudden realizing the Wayfair laws affected them, and now 7 years post Wayfair, having potential exposure in states that they didn't realize they had. So staying on top of it is super important on a state-by-state basis, right? Because the laws by state are different. Some states have an economic nexus threshold of 100,000, while others are 500, and others are 250. So being on top of it with especially these third-party softwares are super helpful in keeping up with that, but also as a business, keeping up with it yourself to make sure that what the software is saying is true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Go ahead. Sorry.
and excuse me, just taking care of VDAs and using the voluntary disclosure process has been a struggle, but also important for me to manage. And I think most states are quite reasonable in dealing with new startups and companies that are not sales tax experts, and they're willing to work with you. And as long as you kind of admit upfront that you're new to this, they are very forgiving in terms of past reporting and filing VDAs and using working with both of you on filing those VDAs has been a good process to kind of start fresh and kind of not really worry about what was done in the past and just say, okay, we're going to take care of those issues, and going forward, we're going to be super clean with our sales tax.
And there are benefits to the business too, right? So, obviously coming up front is a lot better than getting caught down the line, right? Especially if the business is aware it's something that is supposed to be taken care of. And then kind of the point of it too is really just to get you in a position of comfortability. Nobody likes to hear that their business is not compliance. The whole point of running a business is just to do things the way that you should be doing things, right? So, the fact that those states even have those options that are available. And to your point, I know you mentioned that it was great working with us, but, one of the things that Breea and I get to do is we actually work with a lot of state representatives, and we've actually over the years, really built those relationships with those state representatives, because a lot of them have been in place or at least been in a role within the voluntary disclosure units for some time. So it's been great to have that experience to work with each of those individuals and be able to kind of handle things on a little bit more of a case-by-case basis to get the best situation for you too. Some of the states, you'll notice, like Washington, right off the bat on their website, they specifically say like everything is case by case, but it truly is, right? And then we can always try to push for the best benefit for your company when you have the ability to have the wherewithal and go forward and kind of admit to the state that we need to fix something, right? We need to do something about it. So, I think you've been pretty instrumental in that for some of the companies that you've worked with us, and making sure that that gets done and utilizing where necessary the resources that are available.
Mm-hmm.
So, how has technology kind of played a role in your understanding and streamlining of your sales tax compliance process?
It's been a huge part, and it's really essential, and I wouldn't be able to be compliant without the technology behind it. And filing the monthly sales tax returns when we're having potentially thousands of sales in that month, and trying to deal with any sort of spreadsheet and then calculation of the sales tax owed, it is really not possible. So by streamlining through our payment processor and then connecting to the third-party sales tax software that actually collects all the data and kind of packages it all nice and neat into individual state and local jurisdiction returns, and then actually will then pull the funds from our bank account to then remit to those various locations. Makes my life 1,000 times easier, and I don't have to worry about hiring a sales tax person in-house. That all they do is compile and file all the monthly returns.
Yeah. And I think you have actually seen some of what that filing looks like on a manual basis. It can get out of control quite quickly with just the amount of rates that exist that are out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you've actually been through the process of having different types of automation services, right? Work in conjunction with some of the companies that you've worked with over the past couple of years. Do you have any horror stories that you want to tell us about that? Doesn't have to be specific.
I think just over the years of just making sure, a couple years ago, the company I was with, we actually started a whole new product and forgot to basically tag that product as taxable. So we were making continual sales of this new product and pushing the new product and not realizing until the following month that we should have been charging and collecting sales tax on those sales, and then we obviously couldn't go back to our customers and say, oops, you owe us additional money for sales tax. So that actually hurt my company's bottom line at the time. And then we quickly were able to resolve and say to our engineering folks that anytime we have a new product, we have to make sure that we flip the switch and make sure that if it is taxable, to start collecting tax as soon as possible on that, because we don't want to have this black hole of sales that we realize we're going to have a big expense of paying the sales tax ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, we've actually seen it go sometimes the other way too, right? Where like there's a new product that's put into place and some of the softwares that are out there actually automatically default it to a taxable item, or like tangible personal property, which, you know, generally based would be taxable across the board. And in some instances, they were actually like over, right? Where maybe they shouldn't have actually been collecting. So I think it goes to the testament that you stated, like, you know, having that automation in place is crucial. But to Breea's point, having somebody who actually can understand that software and put the proper restraints and testing in place to make sure that it's working the way that you want it to work is absolutely crucial to making sure that sales tax remains compliant. You know, I hear all the time, not so much clients, but like people in general that I talk to about like what I do for a living. We're always like, oh, sales tax, that's easy, you tax everything, right? But it can be so, you know, various across the states and ambiguous in some states as to whether or not something is taxable. So it definitely, it's a little bit crazy, and you're in kind of a fun space where you are still e-commerce, right? You still are selling a product right now, with Birdbuddy, right? But you have this additional kind of layer to it that is that platform, that availability of being able to kind of see these birds as they come over to your feeder, which is amazing. You know, so there's that additional layer of complication that comes with, you know, any kind of e-commerce company that kind of enters into an additional space of technology too.
Mm-hmm.
Using technology and automation can be great, but the implementation and monitoring, right? Because without, as you mentioned, without properly coding, your tax collections could be wrong, or without properly monitoring, your tax collections could break, and all of a sudden you find out that you weren't collecting sales tax or reporting sales tax for a period of time if you weren't monitoring it, and that can raise flags with states. All of a sudden you went from reporting, I don't know, $10,000 of sales tax monthly to a state to all of a sudden zero, and now the state is like, wait, what happened? And they could flag for an audit, and then it becomes a bigger mess than it could have been if there's monitorization throughout with the technology, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that with automation also comes a little bit of manpower there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Are there any other like mistakes, I call them horror stories, really, that like you've seen throughout your process with implementing technology?
I'd say just kind of staying on top of everything, and with adding sales tax to products that were not previously taxed, and kind of having to basically sell that to your customers. The fact that last month we didn't charge sales tax, and then this month we did, and explain that we probably should have charged sales tax the previous month, but we just didn't have the bandwidth to set things up immediately, because when companies are founded, sales tax is usually not the first thing that founders are thinking about. So there's usually some sort of delay between the first sales and when sales tax software goes live and it's calculating and charging correctly. So just making sure that basically the whole company is kind of on board with the fact that we need to be compliant with sales tax, and unfortunately pass it on to the customers to pay, and kind of explain that and kind of swallow that medicine as painful as not painful as possible.
Yeah. It's always tough too, because I know I work in the space, so it's a little bit different for me, but like I always expect to pay sales tax, right? And like those handful of times, because I don't know every taxable product throughout the US. Sometimes we do have to research it, right? But one of the big ones you see is like food in certain states. There's different foods that are taxed at different rates and whatnot. So like as a consumer, I always expect to pay sales tax. So I'm sure those conversations sometimes can be tough with your customers when they're not expecting or when they're not seeing it from previous months. But the business, is doing the right thing, right? Like the business is evaluating their tax position, and every business should, especially in the e-commerce space, as laws are changing. I mentioned food, and I know that's not really your space, but like, bird feed in some states can be taxable, and some states it might not be, right? So, and that's something that, somebody who's using your product might need in order to get those birds to come to the feeder, right? So, it's definitely, changing too constantly, what is taxable and what is not taxable. One of the things that Breea and I get the privilege of doing here and with them is being able to, write articles and being able to inform our clients about the different changes that are going on. And I can tell you, and I'm sure Breea can attest to it too, it's every week it's something different. It's always exciting to be in the sales tax world, and especially in the e-commerce world and retail space as well. Like these things are constantly changing, even though they feel like they've been around forever. So
Right. That's why I appreciate when I get an email notification of some state changing their sales tax as of January 1st. I'm usually emailing both of you immediately to say, does this apply to me? Because once again, I want to go to the experts, and I don't want to guess and figure it out myself if I kind of go down the wrong path. So it's always helpful, and I appreciate that kind of quick turnaround where we can quickly chat to say, yes, this applies to you, or no, it doesn't.
yeah. If you don't already, you should subscribe to our Dash of Salt. That's, we release articles weekly that talk about this type of thing all the time. So, feel free to join and get those emails. Everybody wants to talk about sales tax.